But from your perspective, when you're sitting up there under goggles, you're going to the X, you got 25, 30 Rangers in the back ready to go do God's work that night. What is that like from a pilot's perspective, just to do that?
I will say that, it's probably the greatest adrenaline rush you're ever going to experience, right? So probably similar to as soon as we hit, on the ground and you get the crew dog going ramp and getting everybody off the aircraft and stuff like that. And you are just in absolute complete control of that environment, whatever it was, and you're getting ready to go do what you came in there to do. That feeling that you're feeling coming off the ramp is the same thing we're feeling RPM bound, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, hey, it's on like Donkey Kong, and we're going to make this thing happen.
Yeah.
And so that's probably some of that love, to be fair with you, love of the mission, love of the dudes doing it, right? Love for taking care of people and being there and promising them, that under no circumstances will I leave you and put you in a bad spot. I will always be there, right?
Yeah. Welcome to the Leading with Vulnerability podcast. I'm your host, Yuma Barnett. You guys are all very familiar with me. And today my guest is Nate Swann. And by looking at that sweet flow and beard that he has, you wouldn't guess that he's a retired Army officer from the aviation world. I've probably rode on some of his aircraft at some point in my career because he spent some time in the special operations aviation realm, and we're definitely going to talk about that. But Nate and I go back. We were cohort members in the Honor Foundation. You guys hear me and might be sick of me preaching about the Honor Foundation, but I think we both had great experiences there and are still very tied in, both of us, to the Honor Foundation. Nate's got some great stories about his career, his post-career, and things that he's encountered in his life that I think will be inspirational to everybody that's out there listening. I'm gonna get off the mic. I'm gonna pass it to Nate, and we'll get on with this podcast.
Hey, Yuma, thanks so much for bringing me on and having me a part of this conversation. I think what you're doing is great. I think it's absolutely phenomenal that folks get the opportunity to kind of sit down and kind of really kind of dig deep into who they are and what really matters out there, which really is kind of the human element, right, of what's going on, right? We preach and soft all the time that humans are more important than hardware, but we spend a lot of time focusing on those training events and all those other activities and all those other skills, but sometimes we preach the human is so important, but sometimes don't necessarily put the effort into actually developing the human like we really should be. So I'm super excited to be a part of what you're doing here, and can't wait to really kind of help grow this community even further.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And you're right. We always do say the human's more important than the hardware, but I've spent a lot of time focusing on the hardware over my career. And when it came to your helicopters, I spent a lot of time focused on what was going on with them, whether I was going to get in and get out or what was going on. So appreciate that. Appreciate those kind of words. And I'm just glad you're here. So we got to start with the question, that everybody gets. And that is, what's your definition of vulnerability?
Yeah. So, so I actually took some time to really think about this one because I wanted to make sure that it was truly, coming from a place of authenticity. And that really was what kind of, struck, kind of my answer. So I do think vulnerability really comes from authenticity, right? So being authentic, and not just externally authentic, right? It's also internally authentic. We get taught in the military specifically, especially, at a young age, and really they call it the mask of command. But it really is kind of the mask of leadership, right? So, you put on that mask of, I'm a new squad leader, I'm a new platoon leader, I'm a new commander, I'm a new whatever. And I have to fulfill this role of being the leader, being the commander, right? And after you've done that for a long time, sometimes it's hard to take the mask off. Mm-hmm. And when you take the mask off, what's left? What's underneath it? And it really gets down to the core of what an individual is. And I think vulnerability really starts with being authentic and being who you are at the inner core level of what makes you who you are. Some of us are super nerdy, super nerdy gamer types, and that's okay. Some of us are, super jock athletes and stuff like that, and that's okay, right? But owning that and living that and being that authentic person, I think really dives into being vulnerable, because the reality is perfection is not achievable.
Mm-hmm.
Period. And you'll probably hear me say that a couple more times as we go through this. Perfection is not achievable, because you can't be perfect at everything. In the Army, we always talk about, hey, you're 98%, bro. So you need to work on that 2% to make yourself 100. Well, the reality of it is the reason you're probably 98% is because you suck at that 2%. And no matter how hard you work at it, you're probably always going to suck at it. But that's okay, because if you're really good at 98% in the civilian world, we see this all the time. Focus your energy on the 98%, because somebody else is probably going to cover that 2%, and you ain't got to worry about it. But it's being authentic and being who you are that really drives your vulnerability connection with another person. And when you're authentically yourself, you can be vulnerable with others. And that immediately opens the door to so many opportunities to be able to touch and share the best of people, both yourself and others. And so I think, vulnerability really, is being authentically you to the maximum extent that you can be to help yourself and others.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think there's so many that heard a lot of definition of vulnerability. Uh, Maybe it's because it's so close to what I believe vulnerability is that it resonates so well. But I think it's one of the best ones we've ever heard on this podcast. Uh, there's just so much there to unpack. The 2%. I mean, you're so right. I spent way too much of my career. Or I never made 98%. I might have made 90%, right? But I spent a lot of time on that 10%. And if I would have just spent more time in that 90%, I would have been such a better leader, and that goes that's not just military. That's like as a husband, as a father, all of that stuff. So, I mean, you're speaking like Brene Brown language there with the mask on, get your armor off. I mean, everything that's vulnerability. I think that's just a great definition. And in the interest of time and not talking on that for an hour and a half, I'm gonna move on to your army career. What drew you to the army? Did you choose aviation right out of the gate? Did you know that that's something you wanted to do from I was playing Cowboys and Indians, and I wanted to be an infantry guy. I watched my brother do the invasion in Iraq, and I was going to follow those footsteps. What kind of drove you to the army and into aviation?
So I've got I got an interesting kind of background on a lot of that. So folks kind of ask me, hey, why'd you join the army, right? So and my token response has typically always been, well, it's the family business, right? This is what my family's kind of always done. I'm a military brat. Grew up as a military brat. My dad served 34 years and retired as a SOCOM surgeon back in 2014, I think. So he served for forever ago. And I just kind of grew up in the community. So, a lot of folks, I think as a military brat, folks are like, a large population of folks moving into taking roles in the army and in the service these days are coming from the brat community. And I think what it is it's multifaceted. I think it's, some of them are like, hey, this is the family business and this is what I know and I'm comfortable with it and I'm going to move into it. I think some feel like that's maybe a little bit of pressure and stuff like that for them to go into. But I'll definitely say that, from my perspective, I really kind of felt that draw to service at a very young age. I was a Boy Scout when I was a kid, kind of grew up in a service, kind of environment. And I thought it was kind of a natural transition from moving from Boy Scouts, wearing a uniform, doing service things into being a soldier. And to be honest with you, so I signed my contract on August 28th, 2001 to join the Army. I was going to ROTC. I went to Middle Tennessee State University, great program just outside of Nashville. And They were like, "Hey, we'll give you a 4-year degree," and I'm like, "Cool! I don't have to pay for college. This is great. No student loans, awesome." And I kind of felt like, hey, at that point, my dad did not go to Desert Storm, so he missed the 100-hour war. So I was like, "Hey, I can do 20 years, and I can go camping, once a quarter." And I can just play soldier and do fun stuff, whatever it was, and that'll be my career, and I can do that for 20 years, and it sounds great, right? And so I was like, sure, sign on the dotted line. And 14 days later, the entire world changes. And I would be remiss if I said, I didn't sign up for this. I
Right.
don't think this is what I really meant to do, right? Can we sit down and have a conversation on whether or not this is what real, military service is going to be? But to be fair with you, that event 9/11 did have an impact on the rest of my career, just like it did all of us.
Yeah.
Um, but it also was a huge driving force into why I still wanted to continue to serve, right? So I was like, hey, now I'm really getting a chance to kind of prove my mettle and do what I feel is my cause and support my cause, which is going out there and actually making a difference. And so I wanted to kind of take the free education like everybody else, but once the stuff hit the fan and we really started getting to, hey, this is going to be real. Now, like, hey, is this really what I want to do? And the answer was absolutely yes. This is what I want to do. And so I did choose aviation straight out of ROTC. I was lucky enough to get picked up for that. I kind of see myself as I was always probably like the top of the middle third. Is kind of where I kind of saw myself, in the Army, from all the way from ROTC to the day I got out. I was probably like in that region, right? Sometimes I was pretty good, sometimes I was better, sometimes I was worse, but it was probably like top of the middle third is what I'd like to think. Um, and knowing that, I felt really special about being able to go be aviation because one of the things that my dad had done when he was in service was he was the regimental surgeon for 160th from 95 to 97. And so we were at Campbell for like 6 years when I was a kid. And I remember helicopters flying over the house at all hours of the day and night. We were like right underneath the approach path going in and out of Campbell Army Airfield, and I was like, "This is cool. Like, I want to do this. This is really neat, right?" So kind of the same cowboys and Indians kind of thing, right? So I was like, you hear helicopters flying over your house all the time, stuff like that. You're a little kid running out to look out
Yeah.
the window and see if you can see what they're doing and all that kind of stuff, whatever it was, and it's just like once you have that kind of feel, it's hard to let it go. And then additionally, being in that unit at that time, it's really hard, I think, for military brats to really find a sense of family in different environments, especially when you move around a lot, right? You've got your core family, right? You got your parents and your brothers and sisters, whatever it was. But anything extended from that's really hard to find sometimes. And I definitely felt that when I was at 160th as a kid. And I was like, this is what I want to do. Right here I am, 13, 14 years old. And I'm like, this is what I want to do with my life. And I was like, this is, how do I get to do this? Because this is really cool. Right.
Yeah.
And so I had a chance to come on the compound a couple of times and go, pet a helicopter and stuff like that and see all the neat fun stuff they were doing. And it really felt like, hey, this is home, right? This really feels like home. And it's something that I really want to do. And so coming out of ROTC, I got picked up for aviation, which was great. Because that's kind of what I want to do. Why did I pick aviation? Partially because of all that history, but to be perfectly honest with you, I only wanted to walk from like base operations to the aircraft and back, right? So let's call it what it is. I was like, I'm not really interested in this 20, 30-mile walk thing. It's like you guys are too rough for that for me, right? So I'm good with just a short hop out to the aircraft and back, right? So why walk when you can ride, and why ride when you can fly? So
That's right.
So that's kind of some of the main reasons why I wanted to kind of join the Army and then go into aviation. Was because it just kind of had that calling and that connection from such a young age.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, when I hear helicopter now, I still run outside just to look at it and see what it's doing. That's one of my favorite sounds in the world, usually because it means exfil's is coming, right? I'm getting the hell out of wherever I've been. But I love it. So, what was your path in aviation? Where'd you fly conventionally and then assess for 160th? How did that look for you?
So I had a very unconventional career in aviation, right? So career in aviation typically would be something like go to flight school, get qualified, figure out, pick your one airframe you're going to go fly. These days, it's Apache Black Hawk, Chinook, are really kind of the key things you're going to do. Get picked up to do that, get advanced qualified in that particular airframe, and then you go do a career in that. And that's really it, right? And so maybe it's because I'm ADHD and I've got an attention span about this long, whatever it was. But I also understood my career path as well, that I had the chance to kind of bounce between different airframes my entire time I was in service. So I actually started life as an airplane guy, flying spy planes for the Army in Korea. So I joined in '05. Ultimately, when I finished school, went to Fort Rucker at the time, got qualified, in helicopters, and then took a transition into flying airplanes because the Army's got a small detachment of a couple hundred dudes that fly airplanes. So didn't think that would ever be something I did, but that's kind of how it worked out. Went to go fly spy planes for the Army in Korea. Got about halfway through my time in Korea, and I was like, this is cool, but I got buddies who are over in Iraq and Afghanistan who are getting blown up and all kinds of stuff like that. And here I am flying, 88 circles over the DMZ in Korea. This isn't quite what I thought my career was going to look like. Right. So how do I get back to what it is I want to go do? So I was like, hey, well, I want to be 160th guy. So I'll just apply to 160th. And so here I am in Korea, flying airplanes, applying to the Army, helicopter, most advanced, most successful helicopter guys in the entire world. And my application goes through, and you can hear the laughter in the email as it comes back. And they're like, hey, there, LT, how about you go get some more helicopter time? And then we can discuss whether or not you might be a good fit for the unit. And so that kind of drew me towards, well, I need to figure out how to get more helicopter time. And in typical fashion, I hyper-focused on my problem. I dug deep into the regulation and come to find out that I wasn't what the Army at the time called advanced aircraft qualified, because advanced aircraft meant advanced helicopter. I didn't have an advanced helicopter. And so here I call Branch, and I'm like, hey, Branch, I need a job. They're like, okay, well, we kind of need you to stay in Korea, like I always tell you, right? So we need to stick around a little longer and things, because, of course, they can never get anybody to fill slots in Korea. Maybe today's different, but in those days they couldn't. And I was like, well, I'm not volunteering to stay, and you can't make me stay. So nice try, military brat. I know how this works. But then afterwards, he was like, well, I really kind of need an advanced aircraft qualification. Otherwise, I need to probably turn in my wings. And this guy's like, who is this lieutenant calling me about what the heck is going on right now? And I quoted him the regulation. This is what it is, and this is what's going on, and this is what I need, and that kind of stuff. And he was just like, I'm going to have to get back to you, LT. We'll figure this one out. But you just plan on staying in Korea for right now. And he calls me about 2 weeks later, and he's just like, you know what? You're absolutely right. We need to get you an advanced aircraft qualification because our own regulation says you're not advanced aircraft qualified, and you're not technically an Army aviator without being advanced aircraft qualified. And so I was just like, cool. I get to go be a helicopter guy. I had no idea that .mil NPF, implications to what that would be. They had to completely change flight school. They had to completely change everything because of one phone call I made to Branch. But, I got to go back to be a helicopter guy. So I left Korea as an airplane guy, and I came back and I became an Apache guy. The Army needed Apache guys at the time. And I was like, hey, I'll fly anything that you want. When I came through flight school, I was like, I want nothing to do with that Apache. It's not what I want to do. I want to be a Chinook guy because I want to go fly for 160th because that's what I want to do. Right. And so with that, I was like, hey, what can I do to get back to flying helicopters as quick as I can? And they're like, we need Apache guys. So okay, I guess I'll go be an Apache guy, whatever it takes. So went to go be an Apache guy. Loved the mission. Absolutely loved everything about it. Right. So they tell you when you go through flight school, pick the mission, not the helicopter, because the mission is what you're going to fall in love with. The helicopter you'll learn to love eventually, even if you don't love it. The mission is what's important. I didn't really do that when I went to go fly airplanes. I didn't really do that when I went to go fly helicopters, but it got picked for me, and I loved every minute of it because of that direct impact that you got to have with the ground forces and things, right? And so I came back, became an Apache guy. Went out to Savannah, had a chance to run into a whole bunch of 175 Rangers and stuff like that, which was awesome at the time. Before we deployed, and then deployed in 2009, 2010, which to Salerno, and did a lot of gun support stuff like that for those guys during that time. So, which we can talk in some more detail as we get along. But did my time as a Apache guy, assessed for 160th after I came back, and I actually ended up assessing twice. I assessed once. They pulled me in, went to assessment. Everything was good and stuff like that. And they said, "Hey, here's the deal, bud. I had already been slated for company command. I was getting ready to go take company command." And I was like, "Hey, back in the day, you used to pick a guy, and then you just hold on to his number until he was ready to come to the unit, and then you just suck him up when he was available." Well, I guess they had been burned a number of times over the years doing that. That they had planned on somebody coming and they couldn't show up or something changed or what have you. And so then they started getting into a lot of trouble. So they said, "Okay, well, your assessment was fine, nothing wrong with you other than your timing. How about this? Go command, come back and reassess." And to be honest with you, I cried in the parking lot.
Yeah.
It was absolutely, because what it felt like was my family, the connection back to when I was a kid in 95, 97, my family said I couldn't come back and join the family.
Right.
So that hurt a lot. But I did exactly what they told me to do, went back, commanded, came back, reassessed, and everything went just fine. And so went to the captain's career course, and then ultimately became a Chinook guy, and then came to 160th and I was a Chinook guy. So here we are, airplane guy, Apache guy, Chinook guy. So right there is more than just about anybody else does, but we're not done yet. So did some time as a Chinook guy, multiple deployments to Afghanistan, lots of support to the Ranger Regiment. I cannot tell you how much love I have for the Ranger Regiment when it comes to doing work with you guys and things, because essentially I've done nothing but direct support for you guys for the better part of 10 years, conventional or not. So it was always a lot of fun. Got there, did my time at 160th, went off to major school out of Fort Leavenworth, and ultimately was told, "Hey, you're too long in the tooth. We got some other senior guys who are coming back and stuff like that. It's just kind of how the game's played." So I went back out to the conventional force, and at the time, the conventional force really needed airplane guys. So there were like three of us left in my year group, and that was it. They didn't even know I existed because I was coming out of the soft community. They didn't even know I existed. And they're like, "Cool, man, we really need airplane guys. Would you come back and fly airplanes with us?" And I was like, "Okay, sure." That seems to be my thing as I keep transitioning aircraft. So I went back to being an airplane guy, transitioned into another airplane, flying Dash 7s, and did support in both Iraq and then down in Colombia and stuff like that, doing Dash 7 work. And then flew King Air, doing more King Air support and stuff like that up until I finally retired in 2021. So I think when I did the math, I'm qualified and or rated in 10 different platforms between what the Army basically paid for and stuff. And I got experience about another 5 or 6 more on top of that. So like I said, my career is incredibly weird, but what it's allowed me to do is really be able to say, I tell folks this, like, hey, I'm kind of like an inch deep in everything, right? Yeah. So I'm no expert in anything. We can talk about my definition of expertise is here in a few minutes, but I'm no expert in anything, but I'm an inch deep in about everything. So I kind of have an idea of what everything kind of does, how it works, how we can use it, that kind of stuff. But if you want an expert, I probably got a Rolodex somewhere I can spin and go find a guy and give him a call. Like, here's your expert that knows everything about this. However, this is probably, depending on what you need, this is what I can kind of offer you. So, and there's not too many guys that probably can say that when it's all said and done. Because a lot of guys, like I said, even in the Air Force and the Navy and other places that go fly, they're all kind of similar models, right? So they jump into an airframe, they do their thing in their airframe for their lifetime, basically, and they get out and they go do something else. So that's kind of my career in a nutshell. Like I said, it was kind of crazy and all over the place and stuff like that, but it was a lot of fun, and I can definitely say that I thoroughly enjoyed every bit of it, especially the support to the ground force, which is another reason why I'm so glad I was an Army aviator and not an Air Force or a Navy aviator when it comes to that kind of stuff.
Holy cow. I mean, I've read it's one thing to read like on LinkedIn, read your bio and all that stuff, but it's one thing to hear it where you bounce around and flew all that stuff. I mean, what an amazing, that's amazing. Like you might be one of one that's done that. in that detail. And I want to bounce back. You said it there at the end, supporting the ground force. So, I spent 18 years in the Ranger Regiment. I have I have an affection for Chinook pilots, right? I've flown on a lot of Hawks. I've been around a lot of other airframes from 160th, but there's something about riding those big boys into the mountains of Afghanistan. And I've seen those pilots put those air. I mean, I get chills. I'm getting chills just thinking about it. I've seen those pilots, you guys, put aircraft in places that I wouldn't put my Dodge Ram truck because I wouldn't think it would fit. I've seen the rotor blades skimming the side of mountains as they're coming straight down in the Causcardes Pass to pull my ass out of a hot spot. And I mean, I have, on the other hand, 2003, I saw the crew chiefs dressed up in Santa Claus gear as they pulled me out of the Cantigua Valley on Christmas Day. Right, I just have a special place in my heart for the Chinook and its crews because I've spent so much time in that airframe. But from your perspective, when you're sitting up there under goggles, you're going to the X, you got 25, 30 Rangers in the back ready to go do God's work that night. What is that like from a pilot's perspective just to do that?
Uh, I will say that, it's probably the greatest adrenaline rush you're ever going to experience, right? So probably similar to, like, as soon as we hit, on the ground and you get the crew dog going ramp, ramp, ramp and getting everybody off the aircraft and stuff like that. And you are just in absolute complete control of that environment, whatever it was, and you're getting ready to go do what you came in there to do. That feeling that you're feeling coming off the ramp is the same thing we're feeling RPM bound, right?
Yeah.
It's just like, hey, it's on like Donkey Kong, and we're going to make this thing happen.
Yeah.
And so that's probably, some of that love, to be fair with you, love of the mission, love of the dudes doing it, right? Love for taking care of people, and being there and promising them,
Yeah.
that under no circumstances will I leave you and put you in a bad spot. I will always be there, right?
Yeah.
Is something special, right? One of the things I kind of get asked a lot and that kind of stuff is, hey, how much different is it between 160th and the conventional guys and stuff? And especially because the conventional guys got a lot of training and experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, I would say kind of at the height of the war, generally speaking, from a crew perspective, experience-wise, there's almost no difference, right? Because the conventional guys are going to the X, they're landing in the dust, they're doing all the same stuff that the guys in black helicopters are doing. There's not a whole lot of difference per se. Now, what's the difference between 160th and everybody else? Say the same thing as what's the difference between 75th and every other Ranger, or every other infantry unit, right? So it's just an individual unit that has a lot extra money and support to do the same basic, 7-0 tactics and stuff like that everybody else is doing. They just got a little bit better gear. They got a little bit better training, a little bit more time on the range and stuff like that, so that they can do some of those more sensitive, more difficult tasks when we really need someone to do that, right?
Yeah.
And so 160th is really kind of very much the same, And so I think what we'll see going forward, now that we're not in the combat space anymore. So I think we will start seeing that divergence a little bit between the conventional guys and the ARSOA guys these days. But the reality is at the height of the war, probably pretty similar. But nowadays, 160th is going to start becoming more of that specialized unit again, doing things a little bit different. They've obviously got HAR and they've got miniguns. They got all kinds of things that they can do these days that aren't necessarily the same as everybody else. But when it comes down to it, the skill required for that, they will retain their expertise, where they will probably articulate a little bit with the conventional guys, just because of just training budget and that kind of stuff, and opportunities and that sort of thing. But I'll definitely say, being an aviator and being able to take, the good guys to the target, to support the guys on target overhead and that kind of stuff, with fires and that sort of thing. The reality is, I always felt my best when I was overhead a target uh, Rangers or whoever are getting shot at and blown up and stuff like that. And I come on the radio and say, you tell me what you want me to do. Just tell me to make the bad man stop shooting at you or whatever it is that you want. And then you settle down. I will take care of it and put you back on mission.
Yep.
And that was just one of the most rewarding things that you could possibly do, right? So, or hey, you are hurt. Your buddy is hurt. He needs some help or stuff like that. You just call and I will be there.
Yep.
And it's that simple. You don't have to worry. You don't have to wonder. You don't have to, what if? It's like, nope, we will come and get you under any circumstances. I will put this lead wherever you want it under any circumstances. You just tell me what you want. Tell me to make the bad man go away. I will make the bad man go away.
Yep.
And through that relationship, really, it's a special relationship,
yep.
right? And I had the luxury and the wonderful opportunity to kind of be able to basically live that my entire career, right? So I never did time in the Pentagon. I had one 6 month stint on division staff, and it was super painful. I'm so glad I got away from that and got back down to doing tactical stuff again. I really was one of those weird guys that had a chance to do a lot of that tactical stuff and really keep that strong relationship with the ground force throughout my whole career. And then also, I think it's just as important as a leader, pass that on, that love, that connection, that reason, that why we do what we do, onto the next generation so they could take that in and say, at some point, I'm not going to be able to do this anymore. But the next generation needs to be able to pick up the guide on and keep going. Now that I'm later in my career, now is the time to start pulling these guys in. Like, hey, let me introduce you to some things. Let me teach you some stuff. Let me develop you in ways that you may not have thought were ever going to come in your career. But these are important because this is the stuff I've been doing for 10 years or something. I'm not going to be able to do it forever. Now it's your turn to pick up the guide on and keep marching with it. And sharing that with them is almost just as special as doing it yourself.
Yeah. I agree. I'm going to hit on two things that you said there. So in the aviation world, people realize how it's a very regulated. There's a lot of stuff to aviation. It's very safety regulated. It's weather, maintenance, crew rest, pilot rest. I mean, there's a lot of factors that come together to put Rangers on an objective, and they go take Rangers off the objective. But I will say, you said it there. I have seen CW5s stand there and dress down their commanders and say, "No, I'm going back in. I don't care that I don't have to sleep. I don't care. They need me. I'm going now." I've seen that regulation thrown out the window so many times to come in and pull guys out of sticky situations, and it's just very grateful for you guys and what you did over the years. And I will say that, to caveat off that, like you said, there's great pilots in the conventional force. There's great platoon sergeants and first sergeants in the conventional military. And I think one of the best moments I had in my Ranger career was when somebody was like, "Yuma, you're not the best. You're the best available. You're the one that decided to come here and go through the selection, but somebody out there is better than you in the conventional army." So don't, it really helped me kind of put my ego aside and realize. And then when I did spend some time in the conventional force and realize, hey, there are some really great people here. They just chose a different path than I chose. And you're right. If you take away the millions of dollars and the equipment and the fitness facilities and all the stuff that we do, I mean, we're just another soldier. So it's yes, great people in SOF, great people in all levels of SOF. They definitely, it's special because you volunteered to get there and you selected, but don't ever think that because you're not there, you're not special. Because you're not there, you're not a great pilot or you're not a great infantry soldier. We need you guys on both sides, and it's fine. It's not a big deal.
So a great
go ahead.
That I was going to just throw one more thing in there. Great quote that I learned while doing soft stuff, but I used it everywhere. Once I learned it was, never judge your value by your proximity to target.
Yeah.
And the reality is they're everybody, as a senior leader when I was in the Army, I was like, hey, everybody joined the Army for the commercial. Right. Because everybody wanted to do that halo out of the back of the 130 and then go shoot Bin Laden in the face. And everybody did that. And so they went to the recruiter and say, hey, I got a great job for you. 88 Mike truck driver. That's exactly what you want to do. That guy you saw in the video is exactly what that guy is doing, right? So, because that's what all recruiters do, right? So, nothing but negative about recruiters, but come on, they got to make their quota.
That's right.
So everybody wants the commercial, right? But sometimes when you join the army, you don't necessarily always get the commercial. But the reality is we can't, just like you're saying, we can't do what we do, period, without everybody playing their role and everybody doing their part, right? So, so the reality is it's super important to remember that just because maybe you're not the dude who's kicking in the number 3 door and shooting Bin Laden in the face doesn't mean you are just as important, because that aircraft didn't take off without gas in it.
Yeah.
Right. That guy didn't shoot him without an ordnance dude putting bullets in his magazine. Yeah. Right. So the reality is everyone's role is important. And especially now going forward into more of a conventional fight or whatever it was, I think we're going to start seeing conventional guys start taking on much larger roles of severe importance that aren't necessarily going to be, soft specific, which will help reinforce that same thought process. But yeah, so it's super important for folks to realize, and I think you see that on the outside in the civilian world too, right? We can get to that in a few minutes, but that hey, don't judge your value by proximity to target. I think is a great thing just for everyone to kind of put in your heart and just keep going, because that does really help resonate with really your ego and who you are and stuff like that as an individual, and your purpose and your value that you can offer somebody.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's not just military. I mean, that's in all phases of life, whether on the civilian side or the military side. And it's important for leaders to acknowledge those individuals at those lower echelons and let them know that they're important. One of the best things that ever happened to me, I'm a private. I'm in Bagram. It's 2002. I'm burning the crap, because we had to burn all of our own crap back in the day. Real glorious job as a Ranger private. And I'm sitting there, I'm stirring the poo barrel, pouring in the diesel, and I had a Navy SEAL who they were there with us on what was, formerly known as Camp Alpha. He came up to me and he said, "Look, man, I appreciate what you're doing." Right. One, because he said, I don't have to do it, but, this is part of the, him showing me that he appreciated, a Ranger private out there burning his shit, helped me, be a better leader, which is kind of funny, but there's those little interactions that'll help, your people throughout their lives, really. So all that time in uniform, I always ask it, what was that most challenging day that you had while you were in uniform?
So actually, the anniversary of it just came through just a couple weeks ago. So August 28th, 2010. So was the attack on Fob Salerno in Afghanistan. I was that night. I was actually starting my pilot in command progression with another pilot. One of our instructor pilots just kind of getting me, up on the ropes, because oftentimes what happens in the Apache community is, the junior guy is usually in the front, senior guy is usually in the back, at least in the U.S. Army side of things. And eventually, as you move into being the senior guy, they'll pull you out of the front seat, put you in the back seat. Because the thought process is, we're going to teach you how to play the video game up front and do all the things you got to do up front. But the backside, what's so important is understanding the airspace concerns, not hitting mountains as you're flying around. It's kind of a big deal. But then also, what do you have to do to put the guy in the front seat in a position where he can do his job? Well, you can't do that very well in the back if you haven't ever done it in the front. And so that's kind of the thought process. So I was coming out of the front seat, kind of into the back seat, and we're just doing basic training stuff, just like you would anywhere else in the world. That particular night. We had another crew that had gone out and that kind of stuff, whatever it was, just doing typical patrolling and that kind of stuff that we would normally do. And I'm just out there doing traffic patterns, just learning how to fly the aircraft from the back seat kind of thing again, stuff like that, right? You learn it in flight school. You may touch it a little bit, as you kind of go through. But the way we did it was spend most of the time in your front seat. So you're now having to relearn a little bit of the back seat stuff. And so we'd been out there for probably about an hour, I'd say. And we were getting ready to probably call it a night and that kind of stuff and take it back in and be done with it, when we hear the air traffic control tower calling us saying, "Hey, we're taking fire. We're evacuating the tower. You guys are on your own." And I'm just like, we're looking around. We don't see nothing. It is as dark as it is on any,
It can get really dark in Salerno.
in any red illume night in Salerno, right? So I was just like, I don't see anything. I don't know what you're talking about. And if there's something blowing up, you can see that for 10 miles in every direction. Trust me, it's there. We're like, I don't know what you're talking about. So we're like, well, what do we do? And looked at my senior pilot in front. He just was like, I don't know. What do you want to do? I was like, we probably want to take off just to get out of the way. If it's actually out there, probably a good idea to just get out of the way. So we take off, whatever was and things. About the same time that our crew that had just come back in from patrolling, they hadn't even finished shutting down yet. And they were like, hey, we saw it. It's up there on the mountain or whatever it was and things. It's a recoilless or whatever it was. We're going to go take care of it. I was like, okay, well, we'll just go ahead and stay out the way or whatever it was. And that started what ended up being about an 8.5 hour, fight for the defense of Salerno that particular day. So as it just happened to turn out, because of my time doing ISR stuff, I had a TSSCI clearance. When we moved to Salerno, we needed somebody who could be an LNO to the task force that was there at Salerno. I had the clearance. I could go in and go work with the guys, there at the task force, whatever it was, and work with them, with any kind of relationships and stuff like that, whatever it was, all the time. So I've sat with a lot of the fires guys and did a lot of work with them and things. And so between myself, our talk at the aviation talk, and then working with the talk over at the task force, whatever it was, we basically coordinated the entire fight and defense for Salerno, all based off of relationships. Right. So it 100% started with relationships and knowing people and shaking hands and willing to go to bat for folks and stuff like that, and building that, that relationship over time with folks as they were coming through and doing things. And I picked up the phone and called Mike Benitez, my buddy Mike Benitez over at Third Battalion. I was like, hey man, need a little bit of help. Something's going on. He's like, yeah, I heard. Let me start doing some research and stuff. While all that's going on, Chapman's being attacked. We're the only thing up there flying. So we ended up doing, my aircraft specifically did the defense of Chapman, while 2 aircraft did the defense of Salerno. There was actually a Ranger mission that was going off there in the bowl at that particular time. So it just happened to work out that those guys came back and then started working some of the defense as well. We had another 58 crew and stuff like that was out there doing some defense of the Cows Pole and things, pulled the AC-130 off of that particular mission to go do defensive of Salerno as well, and some ISR and things. And so we ended up launching, I think, 7 Apaches that particular day to do, we ended up killing about 50 people or so, all with suicide vests, trying to take everything. There was 1 wounded when an RPG hit the back of an MRAP and threw one of the Rakkusan guys from kind of the back of the MRAP kind of into the front of the MRAP and slammed the door and that kind of stuff. He had a little bit of shrapnel, I think in his eyebrow or something like that, but he returned back to duty that same day. So 50 dead on one side, 0 on the other. It was a good day, but it was also absolutely insane trying to figure out what was going on and things. We actually ended up pulling an Air Force ISR asset from overhead, and they actually talked us on through relationships with the task force and stuff to the guy who was actually, commanding, controlling that particular thing, whatever it was. We put a missile in his car, and then everything kind of stopped after that. Yeah. But it took us 8 hours of, flying and fighting and all that kind of stuff, whatever it was. Ended up being a good day, like I said, from the good guy perspective, but it was definitely an incredibly challenging day to try and do all of that while all of this was going on, and then also try to not, lose anybody. I will say we had 1 aircraft that got shot up pretty good as they were coming in for a gun run on one of the suicide guys. You actually can watch it in this video. I swear the guy must have been a Rambo fan or something like that, whatever, because he's got this PKM on his side. And he's just just going to town on this Apache coming in. And it's just kind of like, I don't think you're going to win this one. He didn't ultimately, but they ended up getting some of that 762 into the aircraft. And a buddy of mine who was flying actually said, "Hey, I've been hit. I'm going down." And he's doing this over the radio. And I immediately thought that my buddy had been killed. right? My buddy had been wounded or something like that, and you get all those emotions and you get all that feeling and stuff like that of, holy crap, what am I going to do now? Luckily enough, didn't get hurt in the process of doing that, but it missed him by about that much.
Oh, yeah.
Where it actually hit the aircraft, whatever it was, and he got the reflection of the shrapnel and stuff like that, whatever it was, in the neck and face and things, and so he was lucky. But all that being said, crazy day at Salerno, whatever it was, and things, trying to just keep everyone safe, but through relationships, through expert training and stuff like that, through all kinds of things, kind of helped us win the day. That's for sure.
Yeah. That's Salerno's got some infamous, I guess you might want to say, attacks over time. A crazy spot. And you're right. It just, all that just makes me reflect on everything that happens in combat, all the craziness that sometimes happens when you're a strike force or a task force or a larger formation. I don't think anything gets crazier than a base attack. I mean, it's just madness because it takes so long to communicate with each other and figure out where it's coming from and who's doing it. The madness that occurs during a base attack is something it's hard to describe unless you've experienced. So on the flip side of the coin, what was your best day in uniform?
So I would say my best day in uniform was another interesting event like that. So when I wasn't doing Task Force L&O duty, when I wasn't doing pilot stuff, whatever it was, when I wasn't doing attack things, whatever it was, I was a battle captain, night battle captain for our task force, 2009, 2010. And I had just come on duty in December of 2009 when we got a report from Bob Chapman that they had had an incident. Okay. They were looking for medevac to come out there and pick up some guys and bring them over to the hospital there at Salerno. Okay, well, we own the medevac, so obviously we're going to make a decision whether I'm going to get them, that kind of stuff. And our guys had just come back from a mission, and they were just kind of like drawing down and stuff like that. And Chapman, for those of y'all that don't know, is only like a mile, like straight line distance, a mile from Salerno. So we're not talking like it's all that far. I don't even think they had to leave the traffic pattern technically to go land at Chapman from how close it was. And so we were kind of like, well, does it really need to be a helicopter that comes over there? And so they reported that they had some wounded. And then the next report was they had 3 wounded. I was like, okay, 3 urgent wounded. We got to do something about this. I was like, okay, well, let's figure out what's going on and that kind of stuff, whatever it was. See if we can't help these guys if we can. If we can help save 5 minutes, let's save 5 minutes, right? And we'll see what we can do to try and help them. Then it went from 3 urgent to about 8 urgent. I was okay, well, obviously something's going on because this is not normal. This is all within probably about 10 minutes or so. So we're like, hey, no matter what, we're just going to launch the medevac, right? They got enough going on that something's happened and we need to help them launch the medevac to them. The next report was, I think it was like 18 wounded. And we're like, what is going on a mile away? Because we didn't hear nothing, right? We didn't hear an explosion. We don't hear gunfire and stuff like that. You're a mile away. You can just hear all this stuff that's happening. We don't hear nothing. I literally walked out of the talk and looked over at Chapman. I was like, I don't see anything going on. What's going on here? The final number, I want to say, ended up being about 40 something wounded when it's all said and done. After we got the 20 number or so, I reached over to my battle NCO and stuff like that, and I was like, go to the Chinooks and tell the Chinooks to spin up right now. Needless to say, Chinooks don't do medevac, right? So they do in 160th, but they really don't do medevac on the traditional side of things, right? So they're typically logistics movements, lots of people and stuff, whatever it was. But I told them, hey, go tell them to load up right now, because whatever's happening is going to be more than our medevac can support. And I would rather get those people here in whatever form or fashion we can do that, rather than make them wait for 7 turns of Blackhawks to go move 3 or 4 guys at a time. Because, of course, the backside of the medevac Blackhawks only got like 4 or 5 seats in it. Not like, 12 like you're accustomed to like an assault platform. So I was like, hey, I had control of the Chinooks, launch the Chinooks, go save them. Well, little did we know at the time, what had happened was that was actually the bombing of bin Laden's courier. Yeah. So bin Laden's courier, for those of y'all that haven't seen, Zero Dark 30 or whatever it was contacted by the agency, brought into Chapman, where he was actually going to debrief them and tell them where bin Laden was. He was not checked like he was supposed to. And the movie does an okay job of it. But the reality was in his vehicle, he parked right beside the agency's, briefing room, that was there on Chapman. Well, what they didn't know, or what isn't really well defined, was that vehicle was parked right beside one of those clamshell gyms. And so what happened was, when he clacked himself off and blew up his vehicle in the process of doing so, killing everyone inside that room. Unfortunately, we could not save the people inside that room. There was nothing we were going to be able to do to save people inside that room. But nobody else died in that incident. We had 40, 50 people that were injured in this particular event. When that particular vehicle went off, it blew up and went into the clamshell gym, which is just fabric, right? It started throwing gym weights around, started throwing bars, started throwing all kinds of stuff, and dudes were in the gym. Lots of dudes were in the gym, right? So a lot of guys were like, they took a plate to the face. That's not something that is an easy thing to come back from in a lot of cases. But because of our response, and because of our efforts to try and make sure that we did everything we could to try and help save everybody, we lost the 7 in the room. Nothing we could have done about that. Nobody else ended up dying on that particular day, and everyone else actually came back to work within about a week.
Yeah.
So even the ones that had to get evacuated for Debagram for surgeries and that kind of stuff, whatever it was. So I hold on to that as like, this is why we exist. This is our purpose. This is what we offer to everyone else. And this is why Army aviation is so special, is if you ask another service to do the same thing, they're not going to come to you like, well, this is how we would normally, this is what the standards and the regulations say and that kind of stuff. Army aviators are like, how can I make it work? How can I problem solve? How can I bring this to a solution and help somebody? And so that's what we did. So it was definitely a super amazing day, stressful, difficult, but even in those things was still an amazing day and a huge piece of history that we know now. So
yeah, and you're the battle captain during this whole thing, is that right?
Yeah.
There's millions of people in the U.S. that went to work this morning as managers of something, right? They're kind of like a battle captain, right? They're out there managing, they're watching things, they see stuff. The worst thing that happens is production line B goes down, or you're at Amazon and everybody goes on strike that day, and there no packages are getting out. You're not getting your 2-day prime. And I think that's what's really unique about the military is you went in as a battle captain. Typical night, you're tracking a few things on the battlefield. This cop comes under fire. There's one Kazovac over here or something. It's kind of a normal night, nothing crazy. You never expect that you're going to be doing a mass casualty evacuation for a partner, for a different organization, a different agency that you don't have communication with 40 casualties. And have to make up a lot of things on the fly to just get it done. And literally lives are in the balance. And I think that's lost on a lot of people in the civilian world that are out there hiring, former captains and special operators. They just don't realize what we're capable of when it comes to the multitasking and then doing things under stress and, the calm under fire type stuff, that we know that if the production line goes down, it's bad, but we'll figure it out and nobody's going to die, right? Nobody's going to die because of that. And I think that's just something that's lost. And we're going to move into kind of your transition now. But before we do it, because we're kind of talking about challenges and stuff, kind of a strange transition, but I know you can do it, is while in service, you were diagnosed with Asperger's and ADHD.
Yep.
I'm going to turn it over to you from there and kind of talk that whole thing.
Sure. So I grew up with the thought process, so again, my dad's a doc, right? That essentially all psychs are quacks in white, in white padded rooms with their arms all locked up and stuff like that. And it's the inmates running the asylum, right? So that's kind of how I grew up as a kid. That was just kind of the thought process to mental health. And so anytime going down the path of mental health, kind of conversation came up, whatever it was, for any reason, for anyone, we were like, oh, that's nothing, right? So just spank them more; it'll work itself out, right? So something like that. So I never really thought I had any kind of a problem. I probably always knew I was a little different, but I just chalked it up to being military bred, right? So,
Yeah.
moved around a lot, saw a lot of things, acted a little bit different from everybody else because crazy, they don't act like California surfers in the southeastern Georgia, right? So, needless to say, there was always a little bit of a learning curve trying to figure out how to interact with others and that kind of stuff for me. Joined the Army, never really had any issues. I did get some interesting questions though, specifically on like that deployment. So I had a buddy of mine, he's now a PhD, Army strategist and stuff like that, whatever it was. He came up to me one day while we were deployed in that deployment, and he was just like, "How do you do what you do?" And I'm like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." I was like, "You respond so different than everybody else when it comes to stress and everything else, whatever it was. It's like, you just have some sort of innate ability to be able to be just a really good battle captain." And I was like, "Thanks. I don't really sure where you're going with that." But I always knew that I was kind of that guy where it was like, okay, incident occurs, stressor kicks in. We can run around crazy and, oh my God, what's going on for 20 minutes? And at the end of that 20 minutes, where are we going to be? At the exact same spot where we started, we just wasted 20 minutes. Yeah. So let's just jump ahead, take on whatever the objective is, and deal with it, right? And that's kind of the way I always approach battle captain duty. But a lot of other folks couldn't do that. And for some reason, I just seem to have that innate ability to be able to do that. And I never thought anything of it, right? Fast forward to my days in 160th or whatever. One of the things that they do test with everybody, you have to volunteer for it, of course, everything, is they test dextrin, right? So there is the opportunity to wake up pilots, inside of their sleep cycles and stuff like that, to go save rangers out in the middle of bad guy country and that kind of stuff. And they give them decks to try and amp them up and stuff like that to be able to, and it's a ADHD drug is really what it is, right? It's a stimulant, to amp them up and then send them out there to be able to go and have the energy and the alertness and stuff like that to be able to go save guys, when in the off hours, if you will. So they got to test it, and so they do a whole process, when you're at, going through Green Platoon and stuff like that, of testing decks. And all the guys love the decks testing days, right? Because what ends up happening is, if you are not a neurodiverse person and you take a stimulant, well, you start bouncing off the walls. It's like you've had 12 cups of coffee or something like that, right? So, and so all of the IPs, all the instructor pilots, love to kind of poke their heads in and see what's going on, because it's just a planning day. Right, they can't have you fly and that kind of stuff. Whatever, it's just a planning day for an event that's coming up later on in the training period and stuff, so that you're just there hanging out. And so I was like, sure, I volunteered, just like everybody else. I'll take decks and stuff like that to get my certification, saying I can, if I need it, I can go do it when they're out there in service. Well, I took mine, and I just sat down, did my planning, did my work. Nothing crazy whatsoever. I'm looking at a buddy of mine who's taking it, because there's 4 guys in the class, 2 of us, one day, 2 of us the next day. And I'm looking at him, and he is literally like climbing up the walls. Like, he cannot sit still. He's bouncing around like a crazy man. And I'm just like, the hell's wrong with him? Right? And so I was like, is something wrong with me or something wrong with him? I don't know what's going on. This is weird. And so, but again, never thought anything of it, right? So not understanding how all this stuff plays together. I get to being a battalion S3. I just had a kid a couple of years earlier and stuff like that. Just moved to a new job, just moved to a new unit, stuff like that. Stress is high. Obviously, I'm the S3, so I got to kind of help manage things and understand stuff and big picture. And it's a big transition from being the guy to being the leader of the guys, right? So it's a big move for everybody. And I remember we were having some maintenance issues with our airplanes, and I sat down. We're on BTC with our headquarters and stuff like that out in Georgia. And for whatever reason, I perceived while on mute that those guys on the other side were laughing about our maintenance issues. I thought that they were just thinking it was the funniest damn thing that they'd ever seen. And I got livid. I started screaming at them. I was like, this is completely unprofessional. I had like lost my damn mind or whatever it was, to the point where they kicked me out of the VTC. I was like, have you ever been kicked out of the VTC? Because I have. And I was like, what the hell is wrong with me? Why the hell would I ever act like that? This is my brigade headquarters. These are like seniors of mine and stuff like that. These are like DACs. They're going to be around forever. They're going to remember this day probably forever. And I was like, what the hell is wrong with me? And so finally, at this point, I had enough stress, whatever it was. I finally went to go talk to the doc. Luckily, we had an aviation, behavioral health clinic that was tied to our unit and the kind of the units there out in El Paso and stuff like that. And I went to go talk to the doc, and I just sat down. I'm like, am I going crazy? Is there something wrong with me? I don't understand. And I'm talking a mile a minute, probably like I am right now. The doc is sitting there and she's listening and she's listening. And she let me go for about 20 minutes. And she was like, has anyone ever told you you're ADHD? And I was like, ADHD? Are you crazy? Right? I was like, I ain't ADHD, right? So I was like, that's a kid problem. That's not a problem that we have as adults and stuff like that. I'm a pilot. How can I have ADHD, right? So, and so she was like, well, would you be willing to go down the path of just finding out? I was just like, if that's what's wrong with me and we can fix this by taking a pill or something, cool, man. Let's do this, right? So I started going down the path of trying to figure out what's going on, because I'm thinking I'm going nuts. I'm thinking there's something wrong with me. And come to find out, I do some psychological testing and things, and little things that I'd always had a problem with really stood out in all of my testing. Simple stuff like rote memorization, right? In aviation, it's very important that you memorize like your emergency procedures and then you spit them back out again. I always sucked at that. I just that mental energy to be able to take something in and then spit it right back out or whatever it was never something I was ever really good at. I had to get to the correlation phase of understanding something, and once it was in here, man, I could tell you all about it. It was like we could go all the way down to drop of oil inside of the machine kind of thing and not had any problem. But until it went from here to here, no guarantees I was ever going to remember it. And she was like, yeah, that's not normal. I'm like, really? I didn't know that. I figured that was like everybody. Everyone has problems from time to time where it's like, no, that's not normal. And so they're like, hey, well, if you're willing, let's put you on some medicine, see if it kind of helps. And I was like, well, how's this going to affect my flying and stuff like that? He was like, well, the reality is you ain't going to be flying with this, but you could fly if we correct this, fix this, and that kind of stuff, help you move forward. So I was like, well, let's just go ahead and just continue down this path and see where we can go with this. And come to find out that, yep, I sure as hell have ADHD. And one of the biggest things that really helped me was going on medication and seeing the difference of who I was, not just as a pilot, not just as a husband, not just as a father, but who I was as a friend, who I was at the office. Like, people completely changed their perspective of me almost overnight as I started seeing these different changes in myself. And I was like, well, look at that. I took some testing at the end of it to be kind of, show that the medication worked and everything's better and stuff like that. And I showed improvements in all of my areas I needed to show improvements. And they're like, yep, sure as anything. So you have ADHD. We have proven it. You have medicine that helps you, and you are better on the medicine than you were when you first started. Voila. Go out and do great things. The Army didn't care. The Army was like, hey, it's fine. Not a big deal. FAA, on the other hand, that's a little more complicated. But the Army was like, hey, it's fine. And so I was like, well, now that I've opened up Pandora's box and I've started wandering down this rabbit hole of mental health, or whatever it was, what else is out there, right? And that is the definition, effectively, of hyperfocus. I started hyper-focusing on what other things of ADHD connections could there possibly be going on with me. And as I started doing a lot of research into this, I started seeing a lot of things that were correlations between ADHD and Asperger's or autism spectrum disorder type 1, depending on what reference you want to look at and things. And I was like, this is really interesting. There's a lot of correlation to this. And one of the difficult things when you're an adult getting diagnosed with ADHD or Asperger's or something like that is a lot of it's developmental. So it's like, how were you when you were 8? How were you when you were in middle school? How were you when you dealt with your friends, on the block riding bicycles and things? That is a big sign as to whether or not there's diagnosable information and stuff like that coming out of what you're having as an adult. So it can be a lot harder as an adult. But as you start looking into it, you start realizing that, hey, this and this tie together. These two things are very common. And ironically enough, how it plays out is, there is a lot of commonality between ADHD and autism spectrum disorder. Like 30-40% of folks that have one typically have the other as well. I would argue they're probably on the same spectrum. So it's probably really just one problem. It's just where you fall on the spectrum. Maybe you're a little more over here versus over there. But the reality is they do play very much together. And so as I was doing this research, I got picked up and we moved back to Savannah. And I went to my doc right as I got to Savannah. And I was like, hey, I want to get tested for Asperger's. And she was just like, hi, nice to meet you. Never met you before in my life. And you want to do what? And I was like, hey, this is it. This is the deal. This is what's going on. This is my research. This is like, and so she was just like, well, you definitely have ADHD. That's definitely not a hard sell. But let's sit down and talk, and let me do some development, talk to some folks and stuff. And I come to find out, as she reached out to her community of folks, hey, is there anybody else who would be willing to test this guy? There was a psychologist down at Fort Stewart who said, hey, I'll be happy to test him. And so went down there. It's the middle of COVID, actually. So this is like 2020-ish. Oh, yeah. Middle of COVID. Nobody's seen anybody face to face and stuff like that. But this guy was like, I'll come see him, do all the COVID protocols and stuff like that. Down there for about 2 hours or so. As I sat down, did all my kind of, testing and conversation with him and that kind of stuff, I did ask, so why did you feel so comfortable wanting to give me this testing? He was like, oh, because I have Asperger's too. So if there's anybody who knows what the requirements are, it's probably somebody who has it. And if you've done all this research and you've done all this stuff and you think you probably have it based off of your history and everything else, you probably do. We can go through the formal process, which we will, but I'm pretty confident that just you walking in here and asking for this and doing this, you're probably 90% there already. And so did everything, got diagnosed with and stuff like that. And that really helped shape a lot of my advocacy efforts and stuff like that I'm doing now that I've gotten out and that sort of thing. I will say, number one, getting diagnosed in service with those things was never career limiting for me whatsoever. Never had a problem with anything. I always had a little bit of emotional problems with folks sometimes, whatever it was, prior to diagnosis, prior to treatment. Afterwards, life was a lot better. But I will say that, I never had a concern for my security clearance. I never had a concern for flying. I never had a concern. Now, they pulled me off flight status to do some of that, medicine testing, which is a common practice for anything, right? Hey, if I'm going to put you on a new med, we're going to pull you off flight status for a couple of months, put you on a new med of whatever, doesn't matter. Make sure that it's good for you. It doesn't have any issues. You don't get sleepy with it or something like that, because we don't folks falling asleep while flying. Make sure that's all good. And then once that's good, we'll put you back on flight status. You go fly. No big deal. But what's interesting is, had I been diagnosed probably with either one of those before I joined service, everything we just talked about would have never happened.
Yeah.
Because you can't come into the Army and join the Army with an active or even previously diagnosed ADHD or Asperger's diagnosis.
Yeah.
So I offer back up both to the audience as well as everyone else I talk to, is like, so how impactful really is it having a diagnosis of that ADHD or Asperger's and doing everything that I just did? If anything, it may have made me even a better pilot. It may have made me a better battle captain. It may have made me a better all these other things. And yet the reality is those people don't get the opportunity potentially serve their country and do all those great, wonderful things that we need them to do. So because of that, let's really go back and reevaluate what really is a limiting condition when it comes to joining the military. Now, I'll caveat everything and say there's multiple stages of this. There's folks who live in their parents' basement that will never leave their parents' basement, and that's just fine.
Yeah.
We're not talking about them. We're talking about the 95% of folks that aren't in that condition and saying, hey, let's evaluate them individually and say, is this a good person, good fit for service? Yes or no. And I'd like to think we do that with anybody.
Yeah.
So why would we not do it with them, regardless of what they've been diagnosed with in the past? So I'll get off my soapbox for that one. But
yeah, that's an amazing story. And so Yuma's opinion, I think you probably feel kind of the same. If you walked into Fort Bragg, Virginia Beach, San Diego, Savannah, Fort Benning, and you started testing all the guys that are wearing the cool kit and the nice uniform, you're going to find a lot of dudes with ADHD. And there's two of them right here on this podcast. Because I was diagnosed with it right about the same time you were. And I was diagnosed with it basically just out of curiosity in my own self. When I went down my own mental health journey and trying to be my best self, and I went to the inpatient facility, I said, I think I have this. And they kind of looked at me like, well, you've been in soft your whole life. What do you think you have this? It's because they don't know soft personalities. But thankfully I have the right provider who said, let's just try it. Let's just, you're here for 3 weeks. And they gave me some Adderall. And I was in college classes at the time. And I was a different person. And it was amazing how instant it was, how much more focus and understanding I had. And I didn't have to read the same thing 6 times. And it really kind of just ticked me off. It's like I've been missing this for 18 years in my military career of how much more effective I could have been if I would have, found this out earlier. And like we both know, there's a lot of us out there, and I think you're right. That is what makes us special, and so special in some ways is the ADHD or maybe the little intricacies. Yeah, everybody understands what I'm saying that we have. And a lot of that stuff, like you said, if it was found out beforehand, we would have none of these stories would have ever happened. And there's a lot of us out there. So, especially now, the recruiting crisis that we're in with the military, there's a whole population out there that might not be getting a fair shake at serving their country. And we definitely should do something about that. So moving on to your transition, you end up med boarding out of service. I talked to a lot of people who've gone through the med board process. I actually recommend the med board process if you're over 20 years and you've been doing what we did for the last 20 years. I say, if you can med board, it just makes sense. VA wise, there's a lot of reasons that it makes sense. So take it if you can. If you could speak a little bit about that process and your transition and how it went and any lessons learned that you learned there.
Oh, 100%. And I too, I will start off saying that, as a company commander, when we reorganized our unit a little bit, coming back from a deployment, my battalion commander at the time said, hey, your company has the medics. So since you have medics, I'm going to take all the MEBs across the entire battalion and I'm going to give them to you. And I'm like, thank you. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Right. And because I saw probably the whole litany of the system, I was very kind of anti-MEB, right? So I was like, there's folks that are abusing this, MEBs are bad and that kind of stuff, whatever it was. And the reality is later on that, look, everybody's going to, there's always someone who's going to abuse the system, right? Someone's going to say, oh, my drill sergeant yelled at me and now I've got PTSD for life and I need to retire. Yeah. And so I'm like, hey, if that goes through, best of luck to you, right? But the reality is, having gone through the MEB process myself, I can 100% say that if you have done time in Iraq and Afghanistan and you have, fought the good fight and you have been a warrior for our country and that kind of stuff, and you have broken yourself, even in training or in combat for what the Army has asked you to do and stuff like that, you owe it to yourself to MEB. The system is designed to take care of those folks who have sacrificed up to and beyond what they should have sacrificed for their country. I call it the side effect of being awesome. Right. So the side effect of being awesome for me is I've got 3 vertebrae that are all now 1, and I've got a low back problem, and I got bad knees and all kinds of stuff. And I just turned 40. Woo! Right. I'm 40 with the back of a 65-year-old.
Yeah, I feel you.
So the reality is that doesn't go away, right? And it doesn't get better. If anything, it probably only gets worse as you get out of the Army. So the reality is if somebody is out there and has the opportunity to MEB, I highly encourage it for anyone, because the number one thing that's going to help you in this process, whether you are beyond 20 or less than 20, I'm a less than 20 guy, right? So I retired at 16 years and a month. But effectively, I get uh, the same retirement I would have gotten had I gone all the way to 20 years because I maybe.
Right.
So I got 4 years of my life back, is the way I look at it, and I basically get a 20-year retirement because of it. So I was lucky in that capacity. But the biggest thing that you get out of it is, and this is for the guys who are on active duty right now. The reality is everything wrong with you, from warts on your toes to gray hair to tinnitus to a bad shoulder to whatever. Every single thing wrong with you is service connected. If you didn't come in the Army with it, it is service connected while you're on active duty.
Yeah.
So the MEB process takes all of those things that's wrong with you, and records all of them, presents all of them to the VA, and helps you get the highest percentages that you can possibly can while you're on active duty.
Yeah.
To then help you with that transition to moving on to your veteran life and life after the Army and that sort of thing. Yep. So the MEB process is a wonderful process. There's people who really want to help take care of you and make sure that you get all of what you're deserving. And it's hard, especially in the soft community. It's hard to think about yourself as an individual, right? It's not because you're part of the team. It's not because the team needs you. It's because of the next deployment. It's not because of any of that stuff. It's called, what am I going to do for me to take care of me, right? And the MEB process really does that. And this kind of leads into some more of our transition talk, whatever it was. But the reality is if you have the opportunity and you can talk to your medical providers and stuff like that, I would encourage anyone, that feels like they have had multiple issues that have grown up and stuff like that, from, I've got 85 jumps and my back and my knee is bad forever and that kind of stuff. I'm like, yep, you probably should go talk to somebody about an MEB, even if you're at 8 years. Yep. Right. Because the reality is it probably will help you. And the hardest thing for me in the MEB process really was Night Stalkers don't quit. Yeah. And I'm quitting.
Yeah,
I'm quitting. I'm quitting early. What's wrong with me? I cannot believe this is what I'm doing and stuff like that. And that same provider that I went and said, hey, I didn't want to go get treated for Asperger's. I chatted with her about it, and she was like, she was also a military brat, so she kind of got this connection. She was like, look, here's the deal. The last 20 years of the Army is nothing like the 20 years before it.
Yeah,
and the stress and the impact and war and everything else that you've gone through, it has been exponentially harder than what my dad went through or something else like that. So 15, 16 years of service is not the same 15, 16 years of service it was in the 80s and 90s.
Right.
So again, side effect of being awesome, you get to go home a little early than everybody else. And that's okay, because the Army is only going to ask for you to put more rocks in your rucksack. And at some point, you got to realize that I can't put any more rocks in my rucksack because I'm not able to keep up with everybody else around me. Yeah. And the most important thing, and again, being authentic, is acknowledging that I can't put more rocks in my rucksack. Let me take the half right face and move on to do other things. So I make the hole available for somebody else to then move in who can do that, because the most important thing is the mission and the service and what is being done, not me and what's important about me and my place in that. That's ego, and that's bad. So if you're focused on yourself and not focused on the mission and what's in the best interest of the Army, which may be for you to take an MEB, half right face, and move on, then you really need to take a look in the mirror and see why are you serving in the first place, right? And so,
Yeah.
That's what I did.
Yeah, there's a lot there that we could talk about. I think you're right. There's kind of two things in the MEB as I think about is there's the pre 20 years MEB, and I know plenty of guys who've done that for various number of reasons. The body didn't keep going, right? The 100% and then some was the then some
Yep.
was gone.
It's
It was
it's
hard for
here,
the
right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I am ready to go put on some kit and go running out
mhm,
the back of an aircraft and let's go right now, right here. But
yeah,
everything from about here down is kind of going, whoa, son.
yeah, yeah,
Let's think
absolutely.
about that for a minute, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, and it's you got to put your ego aside and really have some serious conversations with yourself because you are going to leave and you're going to know that you left something on the table. But in the long
yeah,
run, it's probably the way to do it. And then I have the conversation with the 20-year guys who are like, "Why would I MEB? I'm already at 20 years. I'm going to get the benefits." And I say, "Yeah, that's true. However, comma, you're not going to go you're not going to deep dive yourself like you would an MEB process. You're going to be the tough guy that gets out and we're not chasing 100% disability, but we're chasing what we've earned and what we put ourselves through over the years and then you know now you don't have to retroactively go back when the knee does go out and then get it tied into service. It's more difficult. And for me, I kind of had the provider that was like, you can't, I could have MEB'd, but they're like, why would you? So I did it myself. I did everything that they would do in an MEV process on my own. Saw the providers, went head to toe. I think I had like 65 things on my my VA claim. So just because you don't MEB doesn't mean you still can't do the work to make sure that you're CYA. And there's all kinds of conversation and people against it and for it and what it is. But at the end of the day, you got to take care of yourself and you got to take care of your family. And I know, like you, most people aren't out there taking advantage of it. They actually leave a little bit on the table, and it ends up biting them in the ass in the long run.
you're,
So you
you're
transition
absolutely right.
out,
And
yeah,
I'll throw one more thing in there for you too. Is when it comes to MEBs, right? And why would I MEB? It's like because on day one, where you are, sergeant first class retired, major lieutenant colonel retired, and you walk into the VA and you say, "Hey, I want to file all these problems and stuff like that. Now that I'm finally out, I'm ready to go." They're going to say, "Prove to me that every single thing on here occurred while you were in service." I'm like, "Well, wait a minute. I've only been out a day." It's like, "Yeah, but because you've been out one day, you now must prove that every single thing
yeah,
on your list is service connected."
yep,
And if you can't prove that because I was the tough guy and I didn't go to the dock and I didn't do all these things, which is perfectly acceptable and we've all done it.
yep,
But if it's not in your records and it's not somewhere else, you may be leaving stuff on the table only because you can't directly prove that it was while you were done and while you're in service, and it will hurt you in the long run. So don't set yourself up for failure. Make sure that you take an opportunity to actively show all the things that are tied to your service medically, and make sure that taken care of for your transition, specifically for you and your family, just like you're saying.
yeah, yep, 100%. And like I said, I think we could talk for a whole hour on kind of your MEV process, my retirement process, and the VA process, I mean, it's important, and you just got to do the work. You got to do the work. You got to dig in it and do the work because nobody's going to do it for you, and the VA is definitely not. So, I want to you transition out. I was really, when I was doing the research for the podcast, looking you up. I mean, I know you, but I got to know you a little bit more. That's one of the reasons I love this podcast because I just get to know great people on a different level. I see a lot of stuff, a lot of education. I see institutions I read: Yale, Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, and what that says to me is something that I preach is lifelong learning. It doesn't have to be Stanford, Yale, Columbia. It can be going and picking up a self help book and reading it and taking notes and being intentional about getting better. But reading that, what is your thoughts on education and lifelong learning? Why is it important? Why do you need it? What does it do for you in your life, pre and post military?
So I would say, part of the reason I had all this and all of that I did while in the military, right? So I was charged. I was a battalion XO at the time. I was charged by my boss to say, "Hey, I want to improve our leader development program. Go find ways to be able to do that. We've got some money. around. It's COVID. We're not doing as much and stuff like that. So let's find ways to help folks improve in leader development. And I said, Roger that, sir. And off I went. Had no idea what I was doing, but I'm going to figure it out. And so where did I start? Well, of course, you kind of start at the top and work your way back down. And so a bunch of these programs they do one of two things. They've got a lot of online programs that they offer these days because of COVID. Harvard was one of the last ones, actually, because they were like, hey, we are brick and mortar and you're going to show up and this is how we work. And if you don't like that, then forget you. We're not going to do it. But they finally found a way to be able to integrate some of the online stuff as well. And the reality is I had a chance to kind of test a lot of these things. And then, oh, by the way, it wasn't just I got mine and nobody else got it. We made sure to open that up to the rest of our unit so that Sergeant Smuckatelli could say, hey, I've got a certificate from Stanford in leadership and look at what I can offer, not just the Army, but somebody else after the Army as well. Right. So it was definitely a great program that we had kind of helped establish and stuff like that. If anybody's interested, please feel free to reach out after this. And I'm happy to point you in the direction of a way to do that. But what did I really learn from attending all those programs? One thing I would learn is, and this is actually echoed by the MBA program I'm doing right now, the number one thing that is needed in business today is leaders, period. Leadership is the most desired skill in the business community, period, stop. The number one demanded skill by MBA students is leadership and leader development, because they know, right? So here's kind of the model for what I'm seeing going through an MBA program. Guys have done life for, 3, 4, 5 years or something like that. They go to the MBA program and they come out of the MBA program knowing they're going to move into some sort of managerial kind of role. They're using this as a jumping off point in their career to go do something more. In the Army, I liken that to like go into the captain's career course, right? Or go into, ALC or something like that, right? Going to that next school where I know I'm going to move into more of a leadership role afterwards, right? So the problem with it is, and the same thing with a lot of these other, individual, executive education programs and stuff like that, is they don't talk leadership in B school. They don't talk it because they don't have anybody who knows about it. They didn't do it, right? So to become a PhD and teach at these great, wonderful schools and stuff like that, for the vast majority of them, what did they do? They're educationalists. They did a lot of study and research. They wrote a lot of books and memos and stuff like that, whatever it was. They got published. They did articles, did all these things. But when did they actually lead anybody? Never, in a lot of cases. And operationalists like us don't typically get roles in those universities and things to help teach other people how to do it. So there's this huge gap that's missing. And so when I look at, a retiring NCO out of the Ranger Regiment, and I look at, W2, W3 coming out of aviation, I look at, a young captain who's, pre-command, who's done his 5 years, 6 years, or getting out of the Army, whatever it was, and they're like, hey, well, I don't think I belong going to those prestigious programs because, I'm just an infantry guy. I'm just I'm like, dude, I can tell you, I have sat beside the minister of pick program, pick, country in some of these executive education programs, right? The minister of the interior for Saudi Arabia might be an important guy. Might have Prince, might have about 6 zeros after his name somewhere, that kind of thing, right? So that guy, on top of a bunch of others that are in this room, I would put any of that group of military folks up against them, and you guys would run circles around them in leadership because they don't have a clue. And the problem is, what ends up happening in a lot of cases is, and this is where you get toxic leaders and that kind of stuff, is how do they learn leadership? How does executive vice president of company X get to be where he's at? He had to become a leader somehow, right? So how do they do that? on the backs of the people that he had to sacrifice en route to getting there in a lot of cases. That obviously doesn't set up for a great culture. It doesn't set up for a great environment. People are constantly running off to other places and things, but yet that dude or dudette found the success that they needed, and that's how they got to be successful. And maybe at the end, they figured out, oh, hey, leadership really isn't quite the way I was doing it because I'm authentic and I was vulnerable enough to listen to people and take in some guidance and stuff. And now I've changed my approach. And so maybe they're a better leader at the end, but they've had all this damage up front, or they never learned that at all and they just continue to break shit.
Yeah.
Whereas I would put any of our leaders up against any of them.
Absolutely.
And watch them do circles around them. Great story. Not the current Johnson & Johnson president, but the most recent Johnson & Johnson president. I don't have all of his details, but here's the bottom line. He is a 8-year Army captain. Infantry officer, if I remember correctly. I can't remember if he was Ranger Regiment or not. I think he was. I could be wrong. But he went from being an Army captain to transitioning his career to being the president of Johnson & Johnson.
Yeah.
Probably a pretty prestigious, pretty big role and stuff like that. Where did he learn all his leadership? It wasn't B school.
Right.
But he learned what he needed to learn enough to where he could go be the CEO of one of Fortune 100 companies.
Yeah.
So what you know today, guys, and what you're doing today, every moment of the day, taking care of soldiers and doing the hard work that you're doing today, directly impacts and directly sets you apart from everybody else that's out there doing the work. The problem is we suck at communicating it.
Terrible.
We suck at saying, well, this is what I did, right?
This is what I'm good at.
Yeah. Team, right? Yeah. And so we have to get better. And this is where the transition takes time. And you and I both know this. It takes time to transition. We have to get better at communicating our value, what we do, what we can offer to company X in a language that they understand, right? So you can put 4-letter words in there, whether they be acronyms or not, and they may or may not gather half of what you're talking about. Yeah. And so that's where we have to get better at it. And that's where going through a transition program like the Honor Foundation and others could really help you learn the language that you need to learn to have a successful transition and be able to go do the things that you want to go do. I'll throw this out there because it kind of ties into the same thing. I get a wonderful opportunity to kind of do some of that, send the elevator back down, like we talk about in THF, and talk to guys as they're in transition. And I talked to a guy probably about 8 months ago now. And he was like, hey, I'm a W-2. I'm a transportation guy. And so I've been the logistics guy. I've been doing logistics work now for 20-something years. So I'm getting ready to retire. And I don't really know what I want to do when I get out. And I was like, okay, well, what do you want to do? He was like, well, I don't really know. I'll probably just do logistics because that's what I do. Right. And I was like, okay, well, here's a question for you. If you could do anything, absolutely anything, with no limits, no limitations, no nothing. If you could do anything, what's the first thing that comes to mind that you would want to do? He's like, I own a brewery. I'm like, really? Okay. Why would you want to do that? I was like, oh, I love brewing beer. It's what I do in my free time and this, that, whatever. And I just love doing it. I'm like, okay, cool. Why don't you go do that as a career? And he sat there and he thought about it. And he was quiet for probably a solid 2 minutes. And he was like, because nobody told me I could.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right.
That's what his response was. He said, nobody told me I could. And I'm like, brother, you're retiring and you're transitioning. You can do anything.
Yeah.
You can do anything under the sun. Nothing stops you from doing anything you want to do other than you. That is the only limit. What do you want to do? And go get it.
Yep.
Now, the problem with that can be is if you don't have a good idea what you want to do, you've got this whole litany of things that you could possibly do. And it's almost more important. I'm talking to some folks right now about this stuff. It's almost more important to figure out what you don't want to do than it is to learn what you do want to do, because what you can do as a generalist coming out of the Army and stuff like that is anything under the sun. Well, if I can do all these things, how do I break it down to the one job I'm going to go do when I get out? That's tough. That's
Yeah.
really hard.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to, what do you want to do? Maybe it starts with, well, I don't want to do X. I know that. I remember, I think we were sitting in class with THF, and one of the guys said, like, you know what? I'm a retiring sergeant major. The number one thing I don't want to do, I don't want to lead anybody. I
That's
don't
right.
lead anyone of them. I don't lead anyone of them myself. And I was like, wow, that's striking to me. Like,
Yeah.
this is a sergeant major. This is a guy who spent his entire life leading people, and the number one thing he wants to do is not lead anyone other than himself. And I was like, man, why would he want to do that? And then I thought about it for a second. I was like, because he's burnt out from doing it.
Yeah.
And you know what? Because he's burnt out, and because he's finally, for the first time in his life, got a choice that he doesn't have to do that, he's taking the choice for himself, and he doesn't have to do that. And I was like, man, more power to you, bro.
That's right.
Do what you want to do. Do what's best for you and your family, because at this point, that's all that matters when it comes to transition, is you and your family.
Yeah. Absolutely. I try not to talk a lot during these podcasts, but you're just hitting on so many things that I can't help but can't help but retrograde to that old first sergeant that just couldn't help, coming in over the company commander and giving my 2 cents. But you just hit. So I'll say about education. When you say like Yale, Harvard, Stanford, Emory, I tell guys it's like your Ranger tab, dude. Like it gets you a conversation that you might not have had otherwise, right? You don't have to look at it as the as more than that, less than that. It's going to maybe get you in some rooms that you couldn't get in, and I guarantee, like you just said, guys with our backgrounds, if we can just get you in the room and get people to know you, you're gonna crush at anything you're gonna do. And I run into that a lot, especially with junior like NCOs that are getting out or whatever. Is this they don't know if they belong in X environment? And I say most of the time, no, you probably don't belong in the environment you think you are. You belong in the one above, like 2 steps above where you think you should be. And you're absolutely right. I wish, and hopefully THF and through this podcast, one of the things I hope to do is I hope to have, instead of corporate America and people going and beating down the doors of Harvard B School and Columbia, they start beating down the door of THF and grabbing that talent. Because I guarantee you, I could make Nate, if they need an investment banker, I could guarantee you 6 months, you'd be the best investment banker they've had in that firm, right? Just that's just how we're wired. We're just wired that way, and it's I hope more people start to realize that as we do things like this and share our stories, and leadership. If you look anywhere, leadership's a soft skill, right? And fortunately for both of us, we've had some great leaders in our military careers. uh, but now on the other side of the uniform, I definitely see that there's just such a lack. There's a lack of leadership, and there's a lack of being able to communicate. From whether I'm dealing with the educators at my son's high school, the coaches, or other just people in the business world, there's not any leaders, it's kind of disheartening to see in some cases people that don't have principles and values and just a work ethic. And I think whatever made us great leaders, or the Rangers that I knew, or the aviators, is we just did the work. We didn't sit around and pontificate for hours on how to do things, or second guess ourselves. We just initiated movement, and we did the work, and we always got to the end goal. Might have been a little bit messy, but we got it done. And I think that's what leadership is. And in your current role, you're in business development. I kick it back to you. I get off of you as a soapbox over here, but I think I see that a lot when people are transitioning that go to B school and stuff. They get into like business operations, business development. There's a lot of curiosity about BD and what it means. What is business development? How is it translated into from your military side to your civilian side? Just what is it from your perspective?
Sure. So I would say business development truly is my ability to be able to kind of be the voice for the voiceless, right? Going back to what we were talking about before. When I transitioned out of the Army, I chose to take a role that was kind of, like a half right face away from the Army, right? So I'm kind of still, got kind of 1 foot in and 1 foot out when it comes to it, just because of the particular company that I work for, and some of the stuff that I do. What I end up doing as a business development guy for the most part is I end up being not just the guy who does all the sells stuff back to the army or to somebody else, right? So BD is not specifically sales, right? There is some selling aspects, but it's not like, here's my quota of 12 things I got to sell this week. Get that done, and then you'll be able to move on to something else. So as I tell guys all the time, I'm not in the business of selling used vacuums back to the army, right? That's not my job. My job is to develop opportunities for business to essentially exploit and use, right? So what does that really do? What does that look like? My last 5 years I was in the Army, I was doing ISR stuff. And so the role that I'm doing right now is basically kind of like ISR development for the Army in different facets. So I tell folks I'm kind of the Army's representative back to industry, saying, hey, industry, this is the stuff the Army wants, not that stuff over there that you're trying to sell them. This is the stuff that they want. How can we take this and bring it to the Army? Or, hey, industry, the Army needs something that does this. Can you make something that does this? And then can we bring that to the Army? Yes, no, why? Can I get some more details on what the operator is going to need for it? Can I get some more understanding? And so now I get to put on my old operator hat and say, cool, this is why they need it. This is why it's important. This is what it's going to do. Can you make that happen? Industry says yes or no, and then I go back to the Army and say, hey, Army, this is what the industry can do. This is what they can offer. Can we build a contract? Can we build an opportunity? Can we tack it on to something else that's going on to where you can get what you want while also being able to do it at a price that you can afford at a timeline that meets your current or emerging requirements and that kind of stuff, right? So I play in the contracting world a little. I play in the services world a little. I play in the material development a little, right? So I play in all these places, but the reality of really what it is that I love being able to do is say, okay, I know what the end operator needs because I just finished doing it, or I'm still in touch with the guys who are doing it, and they're telling me all the problems and stuff like that. And I get to go be the voice back to industry and say, hey, industry, this is the stuff that we need. Let's do this. Mm-hmm. And industry says, cool, let's go do that. I would say all BD is kind of the same, even if it's a slightly different, product, service, whatever that you're trying to do. You're trying to say, what do you need and how can I fulfill that, whether that be internal or external of me? And then can I go be your representative back to industry or for industry back to the government, because I've just got that connective tissue of, credibility or something else like that I can offer back. So great example would be I'm a 8-year, squad leader. I'm getting out of Ranger Red and stuff like that, and I want to go into BD. Cool. Sounds great. What do you want to represent? Where's a good fit for you? I'm going to go work for Barrett, and I'm going to sell guns to the Army. Cool. Sounds great. Go do that. You're probably kind of the right guy. You're coming off the sniper team, and you're the right guy to be able to kind of represent this is what they want. And, oh, by the way, you can go back to Barrett and say, you know what? When I was a sniper team guy, this thing sucked and that didn't work and I didn't like this. And can you do this? Or this would help me and that kind of stuff. Help them develop the next best thing and then go back to the Army and say, cool, we've got Barrett 2.0, 3.0, 5.0. This is better than what you've got. Let me help sell what you want back to you. I don't get credit necessarily for selling anything. I just put the people in touch to be able to make sure they get done what they want to get done. Yeah. And I get to use my experience and expertise to help that process occur. And so that's kind of what BD does in a nutshell. It's not very clean, if you will, right? Because it's not necessarily like, here's your X number of phone calls you got to make and then go make them and then you're done for the day, right? It's not necessarily that kind of a role. You go to a lot of conferences, you do a lot of representation, you do a lot of, sit downs with customers, sit downs with other businesses. I work for a small business as well. So the difference is if I worked for Lockheed Martin, Lockheed Martin would say, we've got this whole structure and this is what we do and you fit inside of it and this is what you're going to offer, back from maybe a small niche piece inside of Lockheed Martin. Okay, cool. Or pick any other major, prime or something like that from the defense side of things. I work for a small company where typically we don't prime a lot of contracts, but we do a lot of subbing. And because of that, we work with a lot of different companies. And so I'll go talk to a helicopter company. I'll go talk to an airplane company. I'll go talk to a sensor, company. I'll go talk to a services company, and I'll figure out how to pull all this stuff together. I'll go talk to the government and say, look at what I can offer you in my complete picture of things, and go make friends with everyone, and then go sit down, pull that whole thing together, and then offer that back to the government. So whereas this company may not, talk to this company, I can be the guy in the middle and connects everybody together. And so the benefits of being a BD guy is really the ability to be able to kind of connect the needs with the people who can actually provide it, and be able to make a difference. When it really comes down to brass tacks, making a difference for the guys that if I can't do the mission anymore, let me hook up the guys who are doing the mission with the stuff that they need. Essentially, what I tell them is, I'm in the business of giving you a bigger bag or a better shovel, because you've been told to put 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag. Yeah. And I can't do that anymore with you. So let me do you a solid. I'm going to get you a better shovel or a bigger bag to do the work that you've been asked to do. Yeah. And that's what I do.
Yep. Sounds very similar to what I did in an S3 shop as an ops sergeant major and the S3. A lot of similarities there. And I think you're right. It's similar and different flavors is kind of what I hear. I'm not in BD, but I talk to a lot of guys that do it. It's very similar answers. And I think it's kind of a fitting career for a lot of guys that come from our backgrounds. So as we come in close, we're going to land the plane, the Chinook, the Apache, whatever you're flying these days, because you bounce around so much. A couple more questions here. And I'm just going to quote you. I'm eager to find opportunities to better myself and those around me while providing a voice for the voiceless. Love that. What does it mean when I read that back to you?
So, I got asked a whole bunch when I was in aviation. It was like, hey, why don't you revert and be a warrant? You're a pretty good pilot. You should come back and revert and be a warrant. And I was just like, guys, you don't want me to do that. You want me to stay right where I'm at, because what I can do is I can be a voice at the table that represents you, right? So I had an old quote I used to use all the time, stuff like that, is where you sit is where you stand. Mm-hmm. Because as you're sitting in a conference room and you got the guys who are up against the wall, who are just there kind of taking notes and stuff like that, they've got great opinions and they got some really good ideas. But oftentimes, because you're not sitting at the table, your stuff doesn't get shared. And they may spend hours at the table talking around in circles to an answer that you have in 5 minutes.
That's right.
And so what I try to do is I want to be as much of that voice for the voiceless as I can. Let me go back and talk to my old ISR buddies who are in a very small niche community inside of Army Aviation, but are performing a gift map level mission that is being directed by the SecDef and the Joint Staff on a daily basis. That's a pretty big deal. Let me go back to them, find out what their needs are, and then go back to industry and say, how can I be a voice for them to industry and say, this is what they need. This is how we offer something to be able to help them do their job. And, oh, by the way, make the world a better place. Right? Yeah. How do I help the little guy be able to have a voice and be heard in a place where maybe he didn't, maybe he wouldn't have that opportunity otherwise, right? I was definitely I was definitely bullied a lot when I was in, middle school, high school, and that kind of stuff, whatever it was, especially as a military brat, moving around a whole bunch. It was easy to pick on a guy who didn't have any background. And so maybe that's another reason why I want to be an attack pilot. I don't know. But I was bullied a whole bunch and things. And I was just like, look, at some point I'm going to get into a position where I can have my voice heard. And then when I can do that, I'm going to make sure that I can help the other guys who maybe don't have those voices or aren't able to speak for themselves. I'm going to put myself in a position to be able to do that. And so now that's what I kind of get a chance to do, and that's really kind of a big piece of who I am and what I'm trying to do is be a voice for those guys, whether it's the neurodiverse community, whether it's veteran community, whether it's just helping people be better every day. That's just what is kind of a drive for me. That really allows me to kind of do that, and so that's what I'm trying to do with being a voice for the voiceless, by offering those opportunities for folks to be heard where they may not necessarily be heard, because folks will want to listen to me because I'm a Night Stalker, or because I went to Harvard, or because I have, folks will want me to come in and sit down with them. But the reality is it really me who's talking, or is it somebody else whose voice should be heard? And then it's on me to say, hey, that's a great thing. This is some good ideas, but you really want to go talk to Leonard, because Leonard's got all kinds of ideas and you have no idea about it because he's up against the back wall and he's not allowed to say anything in the meeting. Yeah. So now I get to be the guy who helps bring some of that stuff up and help them be heard in the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. Love that. All right, last question. Same one I ask everybody. You can go back in the the DeLorean, back in time, 88 miles an hour, and you were there standing when you get out as Lieutenant Swann. What advice would you give him as he starts this military life journey?
The number one thing I would tell him is don't forget your family, and prioritize your family just like you would a mission, right? Plan it, rehearse it, execute it, AAR it, do the things that you need to do to make sure that your family is as supported, is as present as you would your work schedule and everything else. I've been lucky, very lucky. I have a very supportive wife and stuff like that, to be married almost 20 years now. But I can certainly say that I was not the best husband, right? I can certainly say that I did not do all the right things that I should have done when I was much younger to build that relationship and keep it as strong through my service and then after I got out. And so, now I'm having to rebuild some of that relationship stuff because I focused on the mission, right? Yeah. Just like we were supposed to focus on the mission. The work and the mission is what's most important. If the Army wanted you to be married, they'd issued you a wife, right? So the reality is if you want a family at the end, then you need to prioritize them as you go through the process. And if you don't do that, they may not be there when it's all said and done. And unfortunately, I think we've seen plenty of folks where that didn't happen. And now here they are, in life 2.0, trying to figure out how to survive with a family that may not be what they started with or what they wanted. And so I would go back and say, hey, don't forget to prioritize your family as you are prioritizing everything else. And sometimes you have to sacrifice the work to take care of the family.
Yeah.
And I would like to think that any professional, any caring leader would understand that and say, hey, boss, I know you need me to stick behind and, do those slides or whatever it was, but it's date night.
Yeah.
And I need to go home to date night and I'll get to the slides in the morning.
Yep.
What's more important, slides or date night? I'm going to tell you right now, the answer is date night 100% of the time.
That's right. 100%.
And the slides can wait till tomorrow.
Yep.
And if you're prioritizing that, I'm going to look at you as a leader and say, you've got your priorities aligned right where they need to be because you understand limitations, you understand boundaries, you understand what's important. And we can work with that. Right.
Yep.
And that's what's important. And I think a lot of times guys are like, oh, I got to get this done because the boss is going to think, well, did you ask him first off? Probably not. Yeah. But then secondly, if the boss is a professional, he's probably going to say, go to date night.
Yeah.
Because that's important. Yeah. So prioritize your family, spend more time doing family stuff. Don't miss out on those opportunities because they will never come back around again. And take that energy that you'd be doing something else with, right? That may not be as important, and focus on the things that really are important, which is what you're going to take away from this service career, which hopefully is going to be, your honor and your family.
Yeah, 100%. Uh, I mean, speaking about the voiceless, that can be your family can be the voiceless if you're not careful. I've been in that trap in my military career, and it wasn't until I had an open conversation with my son and let him have a voice that it changed my whole. I mean, it changed my whole career. Really did. From a an 11-year-old boy. So that's great advice. It's hard advice too. It is hard to do, right? And I think the biggest thing there is you're gonna fail. You're gonna fail at that. You're gonna fail your family at some point. The most important thing is are you man enough to admit it, realize it, and and correct it, come back on course. But Nate, this has been awesome. We're getting up into Joe Rogan territory almost over the 2 hours, which is good. I love it. Great conversation, great stuff. I could talk to you for hours. From one service member to another, thank you for your service. Thank you for the X
Thank you
Fields.
for yours.
I appreciate the X Fields. And thanks for the good infills. Thanks for your friendship. Thanks for what you're doing, being the voice for the voiceless, and continuing to be help the veteran community, the THF community. I appreciate it. If you're out there watching, listening, make sure you like, share, subscribe. Definitely share this one. There's somebody out there that needs to hear this. I guarantee it. So make sure you hit that share button. It's free. It's not going to cost you a penny. Thanks. I appreciate it. And we'll catch everybody on the next episode.